as Ewan said, I'm going to present this systematization of knowledge paper on attacks against leakage of information from training data and machine learning models. This is joint work with colleagues from Microsoft and the University of Virginia. And I'm actually standing in for Ahmed today, who couldn't be here because his US visa couldn't be processed on time. There's a nice backstory for this paper. That David Evans, one of my co-authors, is actually the instigator for the SoK category in Oakland. So the very first paper, SoK paper in Oakland, was published in 2010, so I'm here 13 years later presenting the first, David's first ever SoK paper. It happens that that paper was also machine learning, so we came full circle in more than one way. So let me set up the context for the rest of the talk. So there are many threats to security and privacy threats in machine learning. So here I will be focusing on a particular kind of threat. So attacks that try to infer information about training data in machine learning models. So we have a set of documents or records that are used to train a machine learning model. And then that machine learning model is published made available to users. These users interact with the machine learning model, maybe observing the raw weight, so downloading the model, or interacting with it in some black box manner through some query API. So there might be malicious users that have as the goal, they want to answer questions they might have about the training data, so infer information about the training data. So property inference or distribution inference attacks are one example of these kind of threats. In a property inference attack, the goal of the adversary is not to infer information about the individual records in training data, but rather to infer aggregate properties about the training data distribution. So in the example in the screen, so we have an adversary that is trying to infer whether there are more crosses than nodes in the training data set. A successful attack would be able to distinguish scenarios where this is the case, where it is scenarios where it is not. In a membership inference attack, in contrast, the goal of the adversary is to infer information about individual records. In this case, determining whether a given record, a target record, is or not in a training data set. A successful attack here will be able to determine whether, in this example, for instance, this record with a green cross and a red node is in the training data. Or take attribute inference attacks, which is a slightly more ambitious kind of attack. Here, the adversary is given partial information about the record, and then it's trying to infer the values of some unknown attributes in the record. So in this case, the adversary is given a partial record. They know that the record has a green cross, and the goal is to infer the value of the unknown attribute. The adversary will be successful if it can determine that the value of the known attribute is indeed a red node. Or even another more ambitious attack, data reconstruction attack. Here, the goal of the adversary is to reconstruct fully a record, an individual record in a training data set. These attacks can be targeted, where the adversary is given some auxiliary information that uniquely identifies the target record, or untargeted, where the goal of the adversary is to reconstruct as many records in the training data as possible. So all of this is pretty informal. So I have been glossing over all many subtleties of these attacks. So we might want to find a way to specify clearly what we mean by these attacks, in particular, how to answer these questions. So how the training data set is constructed. Is it sampled? Is it chosen adversarially? Or how the target is selected? Also sample, chosen adversarially, fixed. Or what does the adversary observe? How it interacts with the model. Does it get to see the raw parameters of the model? Or on the other hand, interacts with the model through an inference API, so in a black box manner. Or even how to measure adversary success. There are many metrics that we may use to measure how successful is an adversary. So in the past, in the literature in machine learning, people have been using a formalism inspired by cryptography. So cryptographers have been using for more than 30 years now this game-based formalism to specify security properties of cryptographic schemes. So in the screen, you have on the left hand side the red game, which encodes or formalizes semantic security for public key encryption, or distinguishability under chosen plaintext attacks. Here, we formalize it as a probabilistic experiment, but the adversary interacts with the challenger. The challenger drives the experiment. The challenger first flips a fair coin B, then asks the adversary to select 2 plaintexts, and then encrypts one of them. Then the challenger gives the ciphertext to the adversary, and the goal of the adversary is to distinguish, to tell which plaintext was encrypted, so to guess the value of the hidden coin flip B. Similarly, on the right-hand side, we have the formalization of membership inference in machine learning. So you see the similarities here. We have the same setup, except that here the adversary selects 2 different records. Only one of them is included in the trained data set of a model. Then the adversary has to guess which was included, given access to the model. So in both cases, we measure, or we can measure adversary success in the same way as the advantage of the adversary over a baseline. In this case, the baseline is a random guess, which is successful with probability exactly 1/2. So here I made a lot of choices in the membership inference experiment. So you see the adversary selects the target, but the rest of the training data set is sampled from some underlying data distribution D. You also see that the adversary gets to know the raw weights of the model. So we are passing the result of the training procedure directly to the adversary, rather than giving access to the adversary through, to the model through an oracle. So let's go back to the original membership inference experiment I showed informally before. Let's see how it looks like as a game. So we start by specifying how the training dataset is constructed. So we sample individual records independently from some data distribution D, and then we also sample 2 more records. Only one of them is included in the training dataset. We then train the model on the resulting constructed dataset, and we give access to the adversary to the model. So putting everything together, we recover the membership inference game of Yeo et al. As formalized in 2018. You may be asking, what about differential privacy, how it relates to all these risks? So differential privacy is the strongest notion of membership inference possible. So on the screen, you have the definition. You will probably see it many more times, so I will spare you the details. But I will tell you how to formalize that as a game. So again, you can compare the membership inference game to the differential privacy distinguishability game on the right here, DPD. So the difference is that we make explicitly the notion of adversary. So in the definition of differential privacy, there is no adversary. There is a universal quantification of adjacent data sets. So what we do in the game is formalize that as letting the adversary choose the 2 adjacent data sets. The definition here corresponds to the particular adjacency relationship known as a substitute 1 relationship, where 2 adjacent data sets, 2 data sets are adjacent if one can be obtained from the other by substituting 1 record. So we can prove a relationship between membership inference and differential privacy distinguishability. In fact, one is stronger than the other, so it's trivial. So the advantage, the differential privacy distinguishability dominates the membership inference advantage. Furthermore, we can prove a relationship between differential privacy and the DPD game in the form of this bound. So this is a known bound. It's also very coarse bound. So you see on the plot on the top left side that plots what are, so there are 2 regions. One is a region determined by differential privacy, another region is determined by the bound. So the region determined by the bound is larger. So in terms of true positive and false positive rates of attacks, this is a very coarse bound. In fact, we have an example here for epsilon 4, where you can see that the bound is almost meaningless. So you want to get a strong approval guarantee, you need to use much lower privacy budgets. So putting everything together, what we do in the paper is to analyze all these risks And in this case, we take some exemplary gains for the literature for these 5 fundamental risks that we identify, and we prove a core set of relations between these properties. So the relations are either reductions, showing that security against one property implies security against the other, or separations, showing the impossibility of having a generic reduction. So we prove this core set of properties, and then we prove some implied properties based on this construct, so that we get a full graph in the end. So given any pair of risks in the graph, then we are able to establish either a separation or a reduction. And then we can use this to answer questions. For instance, we can determine the differential privacy protects against attribute inference, membership inference, and reconstruction attacks. However, it doesn't protect against property inference attacks. This is not surprising because differential privacy is meant to protect only the privacy of individual records, not aggregate properties. So please, I invite you to check out the paper for theorems, proofs for all these relations. Also, a more elaborate case study using a game hopping technique to structure a proof that reduces one newly introduced notion of membership inference to property inference and the usual notion of membership inference. So in total, we have more than 25 games in the paper. So there is no canonical game that you should use to measure privacy of a training pipeline in machine learning. What we do provide you is with a toolbox that you can use to formalize a threat model in your particular scenario. So in fact, the next presenter will show you how we put this toolbox to good use by formalizing inference of personal information in training data. With that, I conclude, so please check out the full paper. And if you are not over time, I will take questions. If not, you can find me or one of my co-authors in the hallway track to chat. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Santiago, for the great presentation. And now we have some time for questions. And yeah, go on, please.
Hello, nice talks. This is Yan Zhao from Zhejiang University. Actually, I wonder whether all the 25 games in your paper are static games, or did you consider dynamic games where the defender and the attacker may adaptively change their strategies to better respond to the other side?
That's an excellent question. So adaptive attacks rather than static attacks. I would say that we don't, although we do formalize some new games, most of the games that we consider are taken from the literature. And adaptive attacks are not really considered in the literature. So maybe this is something that we should think more about.
Thank you.
Thank you. So feel free to step up if you have more questions. Yeah.
Hi, Dorbitan. I'm a postdoc at UC Berkeley. One quick question. In your data text, do you assume that the adversary gets black box access to the model, or does it have to get like the actual weights and biases and see all the inside of it?
So it's up to you. So for all these games, there are variants where the adversary has black box access to the model, or you can have a variant where the adversary has access to the raw parameters of the model. We consider both. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, nice talk. So, so you only consider black box attacks, right, in this paper?
Black box? No. Do we consider black box and white box attacks?
You also consider white box attacks? So, like the ones you mentioned, you said that you only get inference results, and from that you're trying to infer membership property, right? But you don't actually get access to the entire model.
So in the games I show in the presentation, I assume white box access. So the adversary, you see the training procedure that produces a model theta, and then that model is passed directly to the adversary procedure. So that's meant to signify that you pass the raw parameters to the adversary. But of course, you can have, as in cryptography, you can have an oracle that only gives query access to the model.
I see. Okay. Thanks.
Thanks, Santiago, again, and thanks everyone for your questions. Yeah.